Good evening, and welcome back to Sleepy History Archive. Tonight we are not following a king into battle, and we are not standing in a crowded medieval market. We are going somewhere quieter, narrower, and much more patient. We are stepping through the gate of a monastery after sunset, when the last daylight has thinned over stone walls and the building begins to belong to candles, footsteps, and habit. A monastery at night was never empty in the absolute sense. Somewhere a lamp was still being watched. Somewhere a brother was folding a cloak, checking a latch, or placing a covered jug where it would be easy to find before dawn. Somewhere pages rested beneath a weight in a scriptorium that smelled faintly of wax, ink, and dry parchment. Somewhere a bell rope hung in darkness, waiting for the hour when it would call sleeping men back toward prayer. But the activity of such a place was different from the outside world. It was measured, deliberate, and mostly quiet. Even its sounds tended to arrive with purpose. That is one reason monasteries make such good subjects for bedtime history. Night in a monastic house brings together architecture and routine in a very soothing way. There are corridors, cloisters, dormitories, refectories, guest rooms, stairwells, towers, herb gardens, and chapels, but each of them is softened by low light and repeated use. A monastery was a machine for order, and order becomes especially visible after dark. A building that may have felt severe by day could feel sheltering at night, because every object had a place, every hour had a name, and every task had already been performed by many hands for many years. So tonight we will move slowly through that world. We will arrive at dusk. We will feel the cloister cool after the sun leaves the stone. We will notice the last candles in a corridor, the dormitory settling into stillness, the distant rise of the night office, the herb-smelling infirmary, the small discipline of silence, and the first grey line of dawn appearing in a courtyard. There is nothing to memorize. Let the place do the work. Let the rhythm of monastic night become simpler and softer as we go. If you are ready, settle in, loosen the day from your shoulders, and step quietly with me through the outer gate. Before we begin, it may help to remember that a monastery was not only a religious institution. It was also a household, a workplace, a shelter, a library, a farm office, a school of habits, and a small world enclosed by walls. Its nights therefore contained many kinds of quiet. There was the formal quiet of prayer, the practical quiet of people finishing their tasks, the bodily quiet of tired men trying to sleep, and the deep architectural quiet of stone that had watched the same hours pass again and again. To imagine one of these places at night is to imagine all of those silences layered gently on top of one another. We should not make the scene too perfect. Medieval monastic life could be cold, strict, uncomfortable, and repetitive. There were duties even when the body wanted rest. There were drafts beneath doors, hard benches, narrow beds, smoke in the air, and the ordinary aches that come from labor, age, illness, and weather. But for our purposes tonight, those realities do not disturb the atmosphere. They make it more grounded. Sleep history is most soothing when it does not float away from material life. A rough blanket can be as calming to imagine as a velvet curtain, if it belongs to a world where it has a clear place and purpose. So as we move through the monastery, we will not rush toward famous names or dramatic events. We will stay near the ordinary surfaces. We will notice what repeats, the same door opened each evening, the same path through the cloister, the same wooden chest, the same bell, the same breath drawn in darkness before the first office of the day. In that repetition there is a kind of safety. Nothing here asks us to solve a mystery. Nothing asks us to keep score. We are simply entering a house where night has been rehearsed for generations. Arriving at the outer gate at dusk. By the time evening gathered around a monastery, the outside world had already begun to lose its edges. Fields dimmed first, then tracks and walls, then the details of carts, tools, and clothing. A traveler arriving late would notice how firmly a monastery stood against that fading. The outer wall did not disappear into the countryside. It became more present. Its thickness, its stillness, and its refusal to hurry made it feel like a different kind of time had been built into stone. The gate itself was practical, but it carried emotional weight. It marked the change from open uncertainty to enclosed order. Outside there were roads, weather, debt, gossip, and the unpredictable shapes of ordinary life. Inside there were rules, bells, prayer, tasks, and known spaces. Even someone with no intention of staying would feel that transition in the body. Noise became narrower. Air changed. Smells changed. One moved from damp grass and animal odor toward wax, wood, masonry, stale smoke, wool, and bread stored somewhere beyond sight. At dusk the gatehouse may still have been active. A porter had responsibilities. Late arrivals had to be recognized or at least explained. Messages might be taken. A servant or lay brother might move through with supplies. A guest seeking lodging had to be received in a way that balanced hospitality and caution. Yet none of this required bustle in the modern sense. Monastic organization worked precisely because it reduced improvisation. A place that lived by repeated hours preferred repeated answers. There is also something calming in how medieval stone absorbs daylight. During the last part of evening the walls often keep a little stored warmth. The hands do not notice it first, but the body does. A courtyard or passage that felt cold at dawn can feel unexpectedly gentle just after sunset. That warmth never lasts long, which makes it more noticeable. It is one of the many small atmospheric changes that would have told the residents what hour it was without anyone needing to look at a clock. In that sense, the outer gate was not just an entrance. It was a threshold between tempos. Step through it, and the day no longer belongs to commerce or travel. It belongs to closure, recollection, and the first preparations for the long, structured dark. The traveler might also notice that the gate did not simply open into a building, but into a moral geography. Medieval people understood thresholds seriously. A door, a wall, a bridge, a church porch, or a gate could change not only where a person stood, but how that person was expected to behave. To pass through the monastery gate was to enter a place where words were fewer, hours were stricter, and movement had to respect a rule older than the person moving. Even a tired visitor, with dust on his shoes and road noise still in his ears, would feel invited to become quieter. The porter's role helped create that change. He was not only a guard, and not only a servant. He was a kind of human hinge between the world and the cloistered life within. He might know local names, recurring visitors, tradesmen, tenants, donors, messengers, and the familiar kinds of trouble that arrived after dark. His small room or station near the gate may have held simple tools of reception, a stool, a lamp, a latch, a key, perhaps a place to record or remember what had been said. His attention made the boundary gentle rather than anonymous. For a lay guest, the first moments inside would not necessarily be grand. Perhaps there was no dramatic procession, no bright hall, no immediate sight of the church. There might only be a dim passage, a quiet instruction, a turn toward the guest house, the faint outline of roofs, and the feeling that one's own footsteps had become too loud. That is often how powerful places work. They do not announce themselves all at once. They reduce the scale of your own restlessness. As dusk thickened, the gate also protected the monastery from the scattered unfinished business of day. The road could continue beyond the wall, carrying animals, merchants, rumors, and weather. Inside, however, the community began to fold inward. The gate was closed not in hostility, but in concentration. It allowed the house to gather itself. The monastery could not keep out winter, hunger, illness, or time, but it could mark the hour when wandering was meant to stop. Stone walls giving back the day's heat. A monastery at night was shaped as much by its materials as by its beliefs. Stone, lime plaster, timber, lead, iron, rushes, wool, and wax each behaved differently after sunset, and together they made the building feel alive in a very low, slow way. One of the first things a person might notice in the evening was how the walls released the day. In summer or mild weather, masonry gives back warmth gradually. It does not glow, exactly, but it refuses immediate cold. Walk a cloister at dusk and you may feel one side warmer than the other, depending on where the last sun touched. Lean near a wall and the air seems steadier. The monastery has memory in it. It has held heat for hours and now returns it cautiously. In winter this same quality may be less comforting, yet even then the walls define the interior world. They hold out wind. They damp sudden noise. They create a silence with thickness in it. Because monastic life relied so heavily on routine, residents likely notice such textures more than we do. If you move through the same passage every evening for years, you know exactly when it begins to cool. You know which turn of the cloister catches a draught, which stair holds warmth longer, which corner darkens first. The building becomes a calendar of small physical facts. This is one reason architecture matters in sleep history. People did not fall asleep in ideas. They fell asleep in material conditions. A monk returning to his sleeping space was not entering an abstract institution called monasticism. He was entering a place of real cold, real wood, real blanket weight, real stone underfoot, and real candle smoke on the air. The grandeur of religion existed, but it always traveled through these ordinary sensations. At night the monastery became more legible through touch than sight. The hand on a door edge, the worn stair tread beneath a sandal, the smoothness of a rail polished by years, the hardness of a bench, the roughness of a woolen sleeve against plaster, such things formed the lived truth of the place. They also slowed it down. Touch is a patient sense. Buildings that are still visible only in parts encourage patient movement. Monastic night therefore taught its own pace simply by being made of stone. The sensation of stored warmth would have been especially noticeable in places where bodies passed close to walls. A narrow passage teaches the shoulder to understand masonry. A stairwell teaches the hand the temperature of the rail or the stone beside it. A cloister walk teaches the skin how evening differs from morning. These are not intellectual lessons, but they are remembered deeply. People who live in old buildings often know them by temperature before they know them by sight. The monastery was no exception. Stone also changed sound. A wooden house creaks, flexes, and speaks in small domestic ways. Stone answers more slowly. It gives back steps with restraint. It catches a voice, removes some of its softness, and sends it back altered. After sunset, when fewer people are moving, this quality becomes more obvious. A door closing at the far end of a passage may seem both near and distant. A sandal on a stair may sound like one precise note inside a larger silence. The walls would have made the residents aware of season as well as hour. In late spring, a passage might remain gentle long enough for the night to begin kindly. In high summer, heat might linger almost too well, making the sleeping spaces feel close until the deeper hours cooled them. In autumn, the warmth would fade faster, reminding the body of winter's approach. In winter, the stone could feel like another form of darkness, present even where a candle burned. The same building, repeated night after night, was never truly the same. This is why the material life of a monastery is worth lingering over. Spiritual discipline did not remove the body from climate. It gave climate a schedule. Cold had to be endured at certain hours. Warmth had to be found in certain rooms. Candles had to be protected from certain drafts. A rule might shape the day, but stone shaped the rule's physical difficulty. And at night, when sight weakened, that shaping became almost tender in its clarity. The house was not merely seen. It was felt. The cloister after Compline. If there was one space that gathered the emotional weather of a monastery, it was probably the cloister. By day it linked the practical parts of the house. Men crossed it on their way to prayer, work, meals, reading, instruction, storage, infirmary duties, and ordinary errands. By night, especially after Compline, it changed character. The same arcade and walk that had served movement now held quiet. Compline, the last office before sleep, gave shape to evening in a deeply memorable way. After it, silence became more important. The community had in effect turned down the volume of the day. The cloister then felt like a place where silence itself had architecture. Arcades framed darkness. Columns repeated into shadow. A small patch of sky floated above the central garth. Perhaps there was moonlight on the grass, or only darkness pooled around a well curb or a low shrub. One candle carried across the walk might briefly warm one arch and then disappear, leaving the stone to return to blue-grey. A cloister at night was not empty theatre. It remained useful. Someone still crossed it. Someone still paused at a doorway. Yet its usefulness had become contemplative rather than logistical. It no longer led in every direction at once. It led gently, and often with the understanding that no more should be said than necessary. The repetition of arches also has a calming effect on the imagination. Regular forms suggest order without demanding attention. They are like breathing made visible. Walk beneath enough of them and the mind begins to accept the idea that the next space will resemble the last. For people trying to sleep, predictability is often more comforting than novelty. A cloister offered that predictability in stone. And then there was the sound. Even a small movement in a cloister after Compline could carry. A hem brushing a wall, a sandal touching flagstone, a soft cough near a pillar, a wind slipping through an open side of the garth, none of these were loud, but each stood apart clearly. Night does that. It edits away clutter until the remaining sounds feel precise. In a monastery, such precision would have seemed fitting. The building itself seemed to prefer measured things. After Compline, the cloister's geometry would have seemed even more deliberate. During the day, practical movement can hide design. People cross quickly, carry baskets, exchange necessary words, enter and leave doorways, and the mind follows errands rather than arches. At night, errands fall away. Then the repetition of columns becomes visible as repetition, and repetition itself becomes the subject. The cloister reminds the walker that order does not have to be loud to be convincing. The central garth, whether planted simply or kept as open green, gave the cloister a breathing space. It was neither entirely indoors nor entirely outdoors. It held air, weather, moonlight, and sometimes the faint scent of damp earth. Around it, the covered walk allowed movement without exposure. That balance is one of the reasons cloisters feel so enduring in the imagination. They offer shelter without sealing away the sky. They make a square of the heavens part of the house. A monk crossing after Compline might not look upward for long. His duty may have been simple: return to the dormitory, check a door, pass toward the church, or carry something that had been left behind. Yet even brief crossings accumulate meaning over years. The same turn, the same shadowed pillar, the same uneven place in the paving, the same faint sound of night air moving through the arcade, these become part of a person's inner map. The cloister becomes less a route than a habit of returning. There is also a social quiet in such a space. Silence after Compline did not mean no one was present. It meant presence had changed form. Men who might have spoken earlier now shared the discipline of not speaking. This produces a different kind of companionship. The community does not disappear when conversation stops. In some ways it becomes more noticeable. Everyone is participating in the same restraint. Everyone is helping the night remain intact. For a listener, the cloister is therefore not just an architectural image. It is a way of slowing the mind. One arch, then another. One step, then another. A square of dark garden to the side. A roof overhead. Stone beneath. No surprise is needed. The calm comes from the promise that the next few moments will resemble the last few moments, and that this resemblance is enough. Candles in the corridor. Medieval artificial light always appears more intimate when we remember how limited it was. A monastery at night was not brightly lit. It was selectively visible. Candles or lamps marked what mattered for the moment: a doorway, a stair turn, a reading desk, a passage toward the dormitory, the way to the chapel. Everything else stayed contentedly in shadow. This makes corridors especially evocative. A corridor with one or two candles is not merely dim, it is arranged around attention. The eye learns quickly what belongs to the pool of light and what does not. The floor appears, perhaps unevenly. The lower part of a wall gleams. Iron hardware catches a warmer tone. Beyond that, edges soften. Space becomes trustworthy but not fully revealed. There is something almost therapeutic in this reduced visibility. Modern lighting tends to flatten night, but monastic candlelight allowed darkness to remain part of the room. That meant movement slowed naturally. A brother carrying a candle was not just bringing light with him, he was carrying a temporary world. The flame altered the meaning of each few steps. It made a door look important, a stair seem narrow, a beam above seem lower, and a turn of passage feel more private. The scent mattered too. Wax, tallow, old timber, cool plaster, and perhaps a trace of smoke from a hearth somewhere farther away all mingled in these enclosed spaces. Night in a monastery therefore had its own atmosphere long before anyone reached the dormitory. The corridor itself helped detach the mind from daylight. It told the body to stop expecting broad activity. Candles also required care. Someone had to judge whether a passage needed one more flame or could do with less. Someone trimmed, replaced, or carried them. Light was work, and because it was work, it stayed modest. That modesty is part of what makes the setting so restful to imagine. A corridor under candlelight is not trying to overcome darkness. It is simply negotiating with it respectfully. The corridor also reminds us that darkness in the medieval world was not automatically treated as an enemy. It was managed, respected, and allowed to remain. A monastery did not need every corner to be visible at once, because every corner did not need to be used at once. This is an important difference from modern habits. We often light rooms as though uncertainty itself were a flaw. Medieval night accepted uncertainty as part of the hour. Light was placed where obedience, safety, or care required it. A single candle could make a corridor feel almost like a sequence of small rooms. As the flame moved, the wall seemed to move with it. The floor advanced only a little at a time. A niche, a peg, a hanging cloak, or a closed door might appear briefly and then withdraw. The person carrying the candle was not walking through a fully available world. He was revealing the world in modest portions. That modesty is restful because it prevents the imagination from having too much to hold. the flame itself would never have been perfectly still. Even indoors, air finds ways to move. A draft from a stair, the passing of a robe, a gap near a shutter, or the slight motion of the carrier's hand could cause the light to lean and recover. Shadows lengthened and shortened across plaster. Ironwork flashed and dulled. The corridor became alive, but not busy. It had the slow animation of fire behaving according to air. Candles also made time visible through consumption. A fresh candle suggested preparation. A shortened one suggested lateness. A guttering flame suggested that the hour had nearly used up its allowance. In a place where bells shaped time by sound, candles shaped it by disappearance. They measured the night softly, by becoming smaller. When the corridor finally emptied, the last candle did not merely illuminate the remaining space. It kept company with it. A low flame at a turn of passage could make an entire building feel watched over. It said that even in darkness, a way had been left open. That small assurance is one of the deep comforts of nocturnal architecture. The scriptorium in its last hour. When people imagine medieval monasteries, they often picture the scriptorium, and for good reason. Even if not every monastery maintained a large, specialized room devoted only to copying, the idea of brothers working by careful light among books, parchment, and ink captures something essential about monastic discipline. At night, however, the image changes. The busy scholarly room becomes a place of endings. The last hour in a scriptorium would have been filled with closure more than creation. Pages were not left carelessly. Quills had to be set aside. Knives, pumice, straightedges, pigments, and scraps needed order. A text partly copied had to be made safe from smudging, damp, or accident. Weight might be laid across a leaf. A cloth might be drawn over a board. A candle had to be judged, finish the line, or preserve the wax. These decisions matter because they show how physical learning was. Books were never just ideas. They were skins, cords, boards, clasps, stains, and labor. In the evening, the intellectual prestige of a manuscript gave way to practical guardianship. Someone made sure tomorrow's work could begin cleanly. That is a very comforting kind of responsibility. It belongs to continuity. Night also changes how a room of books feels. Daytime suggests study. Candlelight suggests custody. Shelves and desks become quieter, almost devotional, even when no one is formally praying. Parchment catches a soft glow unlike paper. It looks less flat and more bodily. One can imagine how the room might smell: wax, dry skin, ink, glue, timber, and perhaps the faint mineral coolness of the building around it. It is tempting to picture constant writing late into the night, but monastic life usually valued rhythm over strain. The scriptorium's last hour therefore fits beautifully into a sleep video because it is about stopping well. Pens are laid down. Pages are covered. Bench is empty. The room does not collapse into chaos after work. It closes like a careful hand. The closing of a writing room also carried a certain moral beauty. Copying a text required patience, but stopping required judgment. It is easy to imagine the discipline of beginning a task. It is quieter, and perhaps more difficult, to imagine the discipline of ending it at the right moment. A tired hand makes mistakes. A weak flame changes the shape of letters. A mind that has strained too long may skip a line or repeat one. To stop well was therefore not laziness. It was preservation. There may have been conversation earlier in the day, instruction, correction, or the practical sounds of materials being prepared. But in the last hour those sounds would narrow. The scrape of a blade, the careful breath before a line, the tiny pause before dipping a pen, the shifting of a board, the almost inaudible sound of parchment being touched, each would stand out more clearly as the room moved toward closure. The work became more delicate because the day's strength was nearly spent. The scriptorium also linked individual effort to communal memory. A page copied by one person might be read by another who never knew him. A corrected margin might guide a later reader. A completed gathering might be bound long after the evening when it was set aside. At night, however, that long future was held in very humble gestures. A page is covered. Ink is protected. Tools are returned. The grand continuity of learning depends on the simple refusal to leave a desk in disorder. For sleep, this is a beautiful pattern to imagine. The mind does not need to finish everything before rest. It only needs to leave things in a condition that can be trusted. The scriptorium teaches that unfinished work is not dangerous when it has been tended with care. A half-copied page can sleep too, in its own way, under a weight, beside a closed ink horn, waiting for morning's hand. Wax, ink, and parchment cooling in the dark. After a workroom empties, its objects continue the evening in their own way. This is especially true of a writing room. A scriptorium that has just been left retains a remarkable afterlife of tiny physical changes. Wax cools. Ink thickens slightly in its container. Parchment relaxes or tightens according to the dampness of the air. A board holds the warmth of a wrist for only a little while. A cut quill lies diagonally as though it had paused between thoughts. These details are so small that most chronicles would never mention them, yet they are exactly what made monastic night real. History is often remembered through grand events, but human beings lived mostly among objects continuing silently after they were touched. That is why the image of parchment cooling in darkness feels more intimate than the image of a famous manuscript completed. It places us inside duration. A monastery would have contained many kinds of such residue. Kitchen embers, damp wool, lifted latch bars, recently turned pages, water settling in a pail, a bench still warm from someone sitting, all belong to the hour after activity. The scriptorium merely concentrates that truth in one particularly memorable room. There is also a strange comfort in unfinished work that has been safely put away. It means tomorrow already exists in seed form. Someone knows what comes next. The line has not been lost. The text has not disappeared. Sleep becomes easier when continuity is trusted. Monastic houses were built around that trust. The bell would ring again. The room would open again. The same desks would wait. So in the dark, the scriptorium becomes less a place of effort than a place of held intention. It does not demand anything of us now. It only reminds us that labor can stop without being abandoned. A page may rest and still remain in progress. That is a deeply reassuring thought with which to enter the night. The darkness after work has a softness that active hours rarely possess. Objects no longer serve the will directly. They return to their own quiet properties. Wax becomes wax again, not light. Ink becomes a dark liquid waiting in a vessel, not a line of meaning. Parchment becomes skin under air, not a surface being commanded by a pen. In this way the room relaxes from intention into presence. A listener might picture the desks arranged in stillness, each holding traces of a person who has gone. One place may be tidier than another. One quill may rest at a slightly different angle. One scrap may have been left near a margin to be used tomorrow. These slight differences matter because they prevent the room from becoming a museum. It remains lived in. Order does not mean sameness. It means that variation has been brought within a peaceful boundary. The materials themselves had histories before reaching the desk. Parchment came from animals, prepared through labor. Ink came from recipes, trade, experiment, and habit. Pigments might travel great distances or be made from local substances. Wood had been shaped into boards and benches. Even the wax carried the life of bees and the work of hands. A silent scriptorium at night is therefore full of hidden journeys that have stopped for a while in one room. This is one of the reasons such an image helps the mind settle. Nothing is being wasted by rest. Rest is part of the life of the materials. Heat leaves the wax. Dampness touches the parchment. The room cools evenly. The manuscript does not demand progress in darkness. It accepts waiting as part of completion. And perhaps, somewhere nearby, a person who worked there has already fallen asleep. His hand, which spent the day shaping letters, has opened under a blanket. The room and the work are cool together, each released from effort for a few hours. Tomorrow will ask again. Tonight asks only that the work remain safe. The dormitory before sleep. Eventually the monastery draws its residents toward the dormitory, and the emotional center of the night shifts from work and passage to rest. The dormitory was not necessarily luxurious, and in many houses it was certainly not private by modern standards, yet it carried a clear promise: the day's obligations had narrowed to almost nothing. Sleep was now close enough to arrange physically. A dormitory at night would have been shaped by order rather than decoration. Beds or sleeping places aligned. Chests or pegs for clothing. Perhaps partitioning in some periods and places, perhaps not much. Wool blankets, simple coverings, wooden frames, straw or other stuffing according to means and customs. The room would have smelled like men, wool, old timber, beeswax, stone dust, and the clean cold of night air slipping in through small openings. Communal sleeping creates a particular kind of quiet. It is not the silence of solitude but the silence of synchronized reduction. One person settles, then another. Cloaks are arranged. A cough is stifled. Someone shifts a foot against rough boards. Someone kneels briefly. Small sounds continue, but each one points towards stillness rather than away from it. The room gradually teaches its occupants to disappear into it. This shared dimension of sleep can sound inconvenient to modern ears, yet it also creates security. One is not alone with the building. Others are within hearing. Others will rise when the bell demands it. Others are subject to the same cold, the same darkness, the same timetable. Communal rest binds a community not by conversation but by vulnerability. All are reduced to blankets and breath. Night in a dormitory also makes the monastery feel younger and older at once. Younger because sleep returns everybody to basic needs. Older because the room has held the same action for decades or centuries. Many knights have gathered here. Many men have placed their belongings in the same kinds of order and lain down in nearly the same attitude of obedience and fatigue. That accumulated repetition is one of the most soothing things about the monastic imagination. The dormitory simplicity should not be mistaken for emptiness. A plain room can carry enormous emotional weight when it is used every night. The repeated act of lying down in the same place, among the same community, beneath the same roof, makes the room almost ceremonial even when nothing ceremonial is happening. Each bed or sleeping place becomes a small station in the monastery's nightly order. Before full sleep arrived, there may have been a short period of adjustment that every communal sleeping room knows. People try to become quiet at slightly different speeds. One man is ready immediately. Another is restless from the cold. Another remembers some small task and must decide whether it can wait. Another coughs and then holds still, hoping not to disturb anyone. These moments are not failures of silence. They are the human path into silence. The room's darkness would have gathered gradually. Perhaps a small light remained for a time, or perhaps the last carried flame passed away down the corridor. In either case, the dormitory became less a place of faces and more a place of outlines, roof beams, blankets, chests, shoulders under wool, the faint pale edge of a wall if moonlight reached it. Identity softened. The community became a field of breathing. Sleep in such a room was also disciplined by anticipation. Everyone knew the bell would come. Everyone knew the body would be asked to rise before it might naturally wish to rise. This knowledge could make sleep precious. It could also make it immediate. When rest is limited, the body learns not to spend too long resisting it. For us, imagining the dormitory is calming because it narrows the world to the most basic human facts. A body needs warmth. A tired person needs a place to lie down. A community must become quiet if any member is to sleep well. In the monastery, these facts were not decorative. They were built into the rule of the house. Rest was humble, but it was not meaningless. Wool blankets, chests, and sandaled feet. Comfort in the medieval world was often built from humble materials used well. In a monastery that might mean wool blankets, a simple chest, a folded habit, a pair of sandals placed in the right direction for waking, and perhaps a small object kept exactly where the hand could find it before dawn. This is not luxury, yet it is highly developed practicality, and practicality can be deeply restful. Wool deserves special attention because it changes the feeling of a room. It holds warmth, softens sound, and gives the body something substantial to trust against the cold. A wool blanket is not the same kind of comfort as modern bedding, but it is serious comfort. It acknowledges climate directly. It also carries the scent of use and storage, which would have been familiar rather than unpleasant to those accustomed to it. The chest beside a bed matters for similar reasons. It represents containment. By night everything unnecessary has been returned somewhere. Belongings are not scattered through the room. They are gathered, folded, and made ready for the next cycle of hours. Even the sandals, left where feet will search for them in darkness, become part of this system of anticipated movement. Good order at night is really a kindness to the exhausted self of early morning. Monastic culture prized discipline, but much of discipline looks very ordinary when examined closely. It looks like folding, placing, straightening, and not postponing little things. The romance of the Middle Ages often overlooks this in favor of chanting and manuscripts. Yet the humble discipline of blankets and chests may have shaped lived experience more profoundly than the memorable moments did. For a listener drifting toward sleep, these details offer exactly the right scale. They are small enough not to stimulate, concrete enough to anchor the imagination, and repetitive enough to calm it. A room of wool, wood, and ordered objects is easier to inhabit in the mind than a hall of ceremony. The monastery understood that a life of vows still required good places to put one's sandals. The small objects of night also carry the memory of morning. A sandal placed beside a sleeping place is already thinking ahead. A cloak folded within reach is already preparing for cold air before dawn. A chest closed at night means that the first minutes of waking will not begin in confusion. These arrangements are ordinary, but they show a deep awareness of fatigue. The person who prepares them in the evening is helping the person who will wake in darkness. The chest, especially, has a quiet symbolic force. It is not merely storage. It is a boundary around personal things in a life that otherwise reduces personal possession. In a monastic context, where ownership was limited and simplicity valued, the few objects assigned to a person gained practical dignity. They had to be kept properly, not because they expressed individuality in the modern sense, but because disorder in small things could spread into the common life. Wool, wood, leather, and linen made a modest vocabulary of comfort. None of them promised ease without effort. Wool might scratch. Leather might stiffen. Wood might be cold to the touch. Linen might hold dampness if the air was poor. Yet each material had a role, and its role was understood. Comfort came less from softness alone than from reliability. The blanket would be there. The chest would close. The sandals would wait. This kind of reliability is exactly what sleepy storytelling can use. It gives the mind a sequence without tension. Fold the garment. Place the sandals. Close the chest. Draw the blanket. Lie down. Breathe. These actions are so simple that they require no suspense, yet they are complete enough to satisfy the imagination. A monastery at night was full of such small kindnesses disguised as discipline. To put things away was to protect tomorrow. To leave shoes ready was to respect the hour when one's body would be cold and reluctant. To fold a cloak was to admit that morning arrives more gently when evening has done its work. The chapel in late darkness. No monastery could be imagined without its church or chapel, and at night that sacred space changed in particularly powerful ways. By day it could be a place of procession, reading, singing, instruction, and visible hierarchy. In late darkness it became simpler and deeper at once. Stone seemed taller. Candles seemed smaller. The emptiness between pillars mattered more. The building no longer displayed order, it absorbed it. There may still have been a lamp at an altar, a vigil light, or a few necessary flames marking key places. Everything else belonged to darkness and echo. This makes a night chapel one of the most sleep-friendly environments to imagine, because it invites attention without forcing variety. The eye settles on one flame, one arch, one strip of pale floor, one half-seen carving, and then stops searching. In such a place sound behaves with extraordinary dignity. A single step is enough. A page turned is enough. The smallest chant, when it comes, does not feel added to the room. It feels released by it. Medieval religious spaces were built to carry voices, but they also carry silence with equal conviction. Silence there is not absence. It is structure waiting. The emotional effect of a night chapel likely depended on the individual. To some it must have felt consoling, to others severe, to others both at once. Yet even severity can be calming when it is familiar. A monastery exists by known demands. No one is surprised that prayer belongs to the night. The bell will come. The office will be sung. The dark will remain mostly dark. Such predictability quiets the mind. One can imagine a brother passing briefly into the chapel before sleep, not for a dramatic scene but for one more moment of alignment. The room would ask almost nothing visual. It would simply hold him in scale. Stone above, floor below, candle ahead, darkness beyond. Sometimes that is enough to make the heart feel orderly again. A chapel in late darkness also changes the sense of scale. During the day, details may compete for attention: carved surfaces, painted images, books, vessels, vestments, windows, steps, screens, and the movements of many people. At night, most of these details withdraw. The building becomes less about ornament and more about height, depth, and direction. The body understands where it is before the eye has identified much at all. The altar lamp or small flame becomes important not because it brightens the room, but because it gives the darkness a center. The mind rests better when it can find a center. A single point of light in a large dim space tells attention where to go, and then allows it to stop there. The surrounding darkness is not empty. It is gathered around that point. Stone floors would have held cold, and anyone entering briefly would feel the change through the feet. A chapel is often cooler than the body expects. That coolness can feel severe, but also clarifying. It separates the room from the sleeping spaces and workrooms. It says, without words, that this is a place for another kind of attention. Even a passing visit would be shaped by that sensation. The silence of the chapel was also a communal achievement. Many voices had used the space during the day and would use it again. At night, their absence remained inside it. A room that has carried chant does not feel the same as a room that has never carried it. The memory of sound seems to cling to stone. This is not magic, but architecture and habit working on the imagination. For a sleepy listener, the chapel offers a calm that is slightly different from the dormitory. The dormitory comforts by nearness and breath. The chapel comforts by stillness and scale. One reminds the body that it is not alone. The other reminds the mind that it can become smaller without fear. The bell rope waiting for the night office. Mechanical clocks were not yet organizing every life with modern exactness, but monasteries were experts in measured time. They divided the darkness not into emptiness but into named intervals, and the bell was among the most important tools for shaping that experience. Before it rang, however, the bell rope itself waited. That waiting is worth imagining. A rope hanging in a stairwell, porch, or tower chamber has presence even in silence. It carries future sound inside it. Anyone passing near knows that at some hour a hand will grip it and the night will change. The rope is therefore one of those practical objects that become symbolic without trying. It is only fiber and work, yet it binds sleeping bodies to communal time. The night office, whether called matins in later usage or described within local practice, required waking when most of the surrounding world remained asleep. This interruption is one of the most distinctive parts of monastic nocturnal life. Rest was real, but it was not uninterrupted. Time belonged to devotion as much as to comfort. Even so, the regularity of such waking may have made it feel less violent than we assume. A predictable interruption can settle into the body as habit. Before the bell sounds, the monastery holds a special kind of pause. Some men sleep deeply. Others hover near waking. The building itself seems to anticipate motion. A breeze moves in a stair slit. A candle gutters somewhere far off. The rope hangs still, yet the community is already living in relation to its future swing. What is calming here is not the coming interruption, but the certainty of it. Anxiety often arises from the unknown. Monastic hours reduce the unknown. Even the next waking has a place prepared for it. The bell rope waiting in darkness is therefore an emblem of ordered night. It promises that sleep will end, but not chaotically. The bell rope's waiting also reveals how much of monastic life depended on trust in signals. A bell is simple from a distance, it rings, and people respond. But inside the community it carries layers of obedience, memory, and bodily training. The body learns the difference between ordinary sound and summoned sound. A bell does not ask whether one feels ready. It gives the hour a voice. Before the rope is pulled, the entire system is invisible but present. The person assigned to ring must wake or remain alert. The path to the rope must be known in darkness. The bell itself must hang properly. The tower must hold. The sound must carry across roofs and rooms. What seems like a single moment of noise depends on maintenance, architecture, and habit. Monastic time was never abstract. It had weight, metal, fiber, and hands. A rope in darkness can also be imagined as a line between earth and sound. It descends from the hidden bell, reachable by the human body. When pulled, it translates effort into resonance. That resonance then enters the dormitory, chapel, infirmary, guest house, and corridor. It touches people who are not touching the rope. In that sense, the bell makes the whole house one body for a moment. There is tenderness in the fact that the rope waits. It does not ring continuously. It does not fill the night with demand. It remains still for long stretches, allowing sleep to exist around it. The discipline of the bell includes restraint. Only at the appointed time does it disturb the darkness. And when it has finished, silence returns changed. The bell sound does not vanish all at once. It leaves a memory in the ear, a fading shape in the air, and a clear instruction in the body. The night has not ended, but it has turned. Everyone knows the turn together. Rain on roofs and water in the gutter. Weather enters monastic life most gently through sound. Rain on a roof after dark is one of the most timeless experiences imaginable, and within a medieval monastery it would have become a whole orchestra of materials. Lead, tile, timber, gutter, cistern, courtyard stone, and soaked earth each answered differently. A little rain might only soften the outer world, making the night feel more enclosed and protective. Hard rain changed everything. Roofs began to speak. Channels filled. Water fell from spouts into basins or ground. The cloister edge might become a line between dryness and silver movement. Air cooled. Candles felt more fragile. The smell of damp stone strengthened. For sleeping bodies, rain can be either nuisance or lullaby depending on whether the building holds. A good roof makes weather beautiful. A bad one makes it memorable for the wrong reasons. Monasteries, like all medieval buildings, varied greatly in condition and wealth, but many religious houses devoted serious attention to maintenance precisely because disorder spread quickly when ignored. Gutters mattered. Shingles mattered. A leaking dormitory made piety feel colder than theology required. When the building did hold, rain likely increased the sensation of seclusion. The monastery became even more an island of deliberate life within a chaotic world. This effect must have been especially strong in the cloister, where one could hear weather closely while remaining sheltered. Few experiences combine exposure and security so neatly. The acoustic texture of rain also supports sleep. It reduces the sharpness of other sounds. Distant movement disappears into its wash. Individual noises no longer stand apart so clearly. A rain-filled monastery is therefore softer in every sense, edges blur, surfaces darken, voices diminish, and the mind accepts that little more is expected until morning. Rain also reveals the intelligence of roofs. In dry weather, a roof is easy to ignore. It simply exists above the rooms. But once rain begins, the roof becomes active. It receives, divides, carries, and sheds water. A monastery at night under rain would therefore sound like a building performing one of its oldest duties, keeping the inner life dry enough to continue. The courtyard would change first in appearance, then in voice. Stone darkens quickly under water. Gravel becomes subdued. Grass bends and shines. If the rain is steady, the center of the cloister may seem farther away, as though the falling water has made a curtain between the covered walk and the open air. A monk crossing under the arcade might feel very close to weather and yet protected from it. That nearness without exposure is one of the great comforts of shelter. Inside, rain softens hierarchy among sounds. A distant cough, a settling beam, a footstep in a corridor, all are folded into the larger wash. This can help sleep because it prevents the mind from pursuing every small noise. The rain gives attention one broad surface. It says, in effect, there is no need to distinguish everything tonight. But the practical side remains. Someone in the community would know where leaks were likely. Someone would remember which gutter had been repaired, which roofline needed watching, which storage area must be kept dry. A peaceful reign is peaceful partly because maintenance has been done before it arrives. The calm we imagine rests on many unromantic tasks. In the dormitory, a brother listening to rain may feel the building's protection through sound alone. He cannot see the roof doing its work. He hears it. Water strikes, runs, falls away. The blanket remains dry. The room remains dark. The night becomes deeper because the outside world has become audible, and the inside world has held. The infirmary and the smell of herbs. Every monastery lived with weakness as well as discipline, and the infirmary reminds us of that. Night in an infirmary would have felt different from night in the dormitory or cloister. The quiet there was more watchful. Sleep was less reliable. Lamps might stay longer. Water, cloth, and herbs had more immediate purpose. The room existed not for shared routine alone, but for care. The smell would have told much of the story. Dried herbs, warm infusions, wool, wax, perhaps vinegar, perhaps something bitter steeped for the body, perhaps old wood and linen aired as best as possible. Medieval medicine cannot be idealized, but neither should it be dismissed. Monastic houses often preserved practical knowledge of plants and simple regimens. At night that knowledge became intimate. Someone measured a cup. Someone checked a fever. Someone adjusted bedding. Someone listened. The infirmary adds emotional depth to the monastic night because it prevents the setting from becoming too polished. A monastery was not a model village where everything functioned perfectly. It was a community of aging, illness, interruption, and mutual dependence. The night brought those truths close. Bells still rang, but some heard them from a sick bed. Silence still mattered, but someone in pain could not always keep it. And yet care itself is one of the most soothing subjects in history. There is a gentleness in the idea of a lamp remaining lit a little longer because a frail brother needs water within reach. There is dignity in a room organized around recovery. Even where medicine was limited, attention still had value. A watched night is different from an abandoned one. In the broader shape of the monastery, the infirmary functioned as a small exception that proved the rule of order. The schedule remained, the architecture remained, but compassion made room for difference. Night therefore became not only disciplined but merciful, and mercy softened stone in the imagination more quickly than any candle can. The infirmary's night would have moved at a different pace from the rest of the monastery. In the dormitory, quiet aimed toward general sleep. In the chapel, quiet aimed toward prayer. In the infirmary, quiet aimed toward relief. That difference changes every object in the room. A cup is not merely a cup, it is water for someone who may struggle to rise. A lamp is not merely light, it is reassurance. A folded cloth is not merely order, it is readiness. Herbs in such a space should be imagined soberly, not as magical cures for every illness, but as part of a practical world that used what it had. Dried leaves, roots, flowers, and bitter preparations belong to a tradition of observation, repetition, and inherited remedies. Some may have helped. Some may have comforted without curing. Some may have been used because there was little else to offer. Yet even limited care can matter deeply when it is given attentively. At night, the person receiving care becomes more vulnerable. Fever feels larger in darkness. Pain is harder to distract from. Weakness can make the distance to a water vessel feel enormous. The presence of another person, therefore, changes the emotional temperature of the room. A hand adjusting bedding, a low voice, a lamp moved closer or farther away, these small acts make suffering less solitary. The infirmary also reminds us that a disciplined community had to make space for interruption. Illness does not respect schedules perfectly. Someone may not be able to rise for the office. Someone may need food at an unusual time. Someone may require warmth when others are expected to endure cold. The rule of the house had to meet the frailty of bodies. This is why the infirmary softens the whole imagined monastery. It tells us that order was not only about control. At its best, order made care possible. Because things had places, help could be found. Because duties were assigned, someone could watch. Because the night was structured, even exception had a room. Kitchen embers after the last meal. After the final meal and the washing that followed it, the kitchen entered a distinct second life. It was no longer a place of active preparation. It became a place of aftermath, embers, stored bread, hanging utensils, scrubbed tables, and the faint smell of boiled grains, broth, onions, smoke, and wet cloth. For a sleep history setting, this is almost ideal. A kitchen after work has one of the most satisfying kinds of order because it is earned. Disorder has been passed through and resolved. Pots have been used and cleaned. Knives returned. Benches wiped. Ash settled. What remains is not expectation but completion. A medieval monastic kitchen at night would have carried that feeling strongly. Tomorrow's needs might already be partially prepared, yet nothing urgent still pulled at the room. Embers are especially evocative. Unlike flame, they do not demand action. They glow, collapse slowly inward, and give off a low warmth that belongs to endurance rather than display. In a cold season, a kitchen with good embers might become one of the gentlest spaces in the entire monastery. In warmer weather, it still retained the day's memory in a quieter form. The practical intelligence of the room is worth noticing too. Storage mattered enormously: bread where rodents could not easily reach it, vessels where they could dry, water where it could be drawn safely, cloth where it would not mildew too quickly. Medieval life required this constant negotiation with spoilage, damp, and scarcity. Good order in the kitchen was therefore a kind of vigilance against tomorrow's inconveniences. At night, however, vigilance relaxed into confidence. The room had been managed. It now waited. Many historical settings feel dramatic because they are pictured at moments of crisis. The monastic kitchen after the last meal is the opposite. It is history at the hour of relief, when labor has just finished and only warmth remains. A kitchen at night also contains the memory of community in a very practical form. Meals are among the most ordinary ways a group becomes a group. Even in silence, even under rule, even with simple food, eating binds bodies to the same hour. After the meal has ended, the kitchen holds what the refectory no longer shows: the labor behind that shared act. The smell of the room would not be one clean scent, but many layers settling together. Damp ash, warm stone, old smoke in beams, cooked grain, stored root vegetables, bread crust, perhaps fish, herbs, onions, milk, or ale depending on place and season. These smells might seem heavy by modern standards, but in a cold medieval night they would also signal provision. Food had been prepared. Hunger had been answered for now. Utensils hanging in order have a special calm after work. A ladle that swung earlier is still. A pot that boiled earlier cools. A table that held preparation is wiped. The transformation from activity to stillness is visible in every surface. The kitchen does not deny that labor was messy. It simply shows that mess can be brought back under care. Embers, too, are a kind of memory. They are fire after its usefulness has become quiet. Someone may bank them carefully, preserving the possibility of morning flame. This small act links night to dawn as surely as the bell does. Fire, like prayer, belongs to rhythm. It is not started from nothing every time if it can be tended across the dark. For sleep, the kitchen's comfort lies in completion. There is no feast to excite the mind, no hunger to trouble it, no urgent boiling pot. There is only the low confidence of a room that has done its work. The monastery has eaten. The vessels have been returned. The embers breathe slowly in ash. Tomorrow will require labor, but not yet. The guest house after voices fade. Hospitality formed part of monastic identity, and many religious houses included spaces for guests. At night the guest area would have had a delicate status. It belonged to the monastery, yet it also carried traces of the outside world. A traveler, clerk, pilgrim, messenger, or relative of some local matter might be sleeping there, someone not fully of the community and not fully outside it either. After voices faded, the guest house must have felt especially still. The day's explanations were over. Food had been offered if appropriate, a bed or pallet arranged, perhaps a candle given or shown. Doors closed. The unfamiliar visitor lay listening to a new building. Every institution sounds strange on the first night, unfamiliar boards, different drafts, bells one has not yet learned. What residents treat as background may keep a newcomer gently alert. This makes the guest house a valuable part of our imagined walk because it restores the feeling of first contact. Much of monastic order becomes invisible to insiders. Guests notice it again. They feel the thickness of walls, the narrowness of windows, the precision of rules, the distance between spaces. Night heightens all of this. From the monastery side, guest rooms also demonstrate controlled generosity. Hospitality required resources, but those resources had boundaries. Bedding, water, and warmth had to be provided sensibly. Safety had to be maintained. Trust and prudence had to balance one another. Such balance is calmer to imagine than either total openness or total exclusion. A religious house at night was not a fortress only, nor an inn only. It was both shelter and discipline. When the guest finally grows used to the sounds and the room stops feeling foreign, the house has done something powerful. It has translated strangeness into rest. That is one of the quiet achievements of stable architecture, and monasteries were very good at it. The guest house also gives us the perspective of someone learning the monastery through sound. A resident knows which door opens heavily, which passage leads toward the chapel, which bell means which hour, and how far a footstep carries after Compline. A guest does not. The first night in any unfamiliar place is partly an education of the ear. The body lies still while the building introduces itself. Perhaps the visitor had arrived with road concerns still active in the mind, distance traveled, weather survived, messages carried, business unfinished, animals stabled, money guarded, or family matters left behind. The monastery could not erase those concerns, but it could surround them with a stronger pattern. The guest might not understand every rule, yet the steadiness of the house would be felt. Doors closed at certain times. Voices lowered. Lights diminished. Somewhere, people knew what came next. Hospitality required this careful conversion of restlessness into rest. A bed alone is not always enough. A guest must also sense that the place is held together. Too much noise, too much uncertainty, or too little boundary keeps the road alive inside the room. Monastic hospitality, at its best, gave the visitor not luxury but containment. The world became smaller for one night, and smaller can be merciful. The guest house may also have carried more varied smells and textures than the inner spaces. Travelers brought damp cloaks, leather, dust, horse scent, outside smoke, and the marks of other regions. The monastery received these traces without letting them dissolve its own order. The guest slept within the boundary, but the boundary remained. When voices finally faded, the guest house became a meeting place between two silences, the silence of the road after arrival, and the silence of the monastery after prayer. The traveler, lying in unfamiliar darkness, rested between them. By morning, even if he left, he would carry away the memory of a night shaped by someone else's rule. Moonlight in the courtyard. Moonlight changes a courtyard more than almost any other kind of space. In full darkness, a court can feel like an absence in the building, a hollow between rooms. Under moonlight it becomes the opposite, the one place where night openly arrives. This is particularly beautiful in monasteries because their courts are so carefully framed by human order. A monastic courtyard under moonlight does not shout for attention. It simply gathers pale clarity on whatever lies exposed: grass, gravel, a basin, a low wall, a bare branch, perhaps the edge of a path worn by many crossings. The surrounding arcades or walls remain darker, making the center appear quieter rather than brighter. A person looking down from a passage or window would feel the building holding the light rather than losing it. This kind of scene is restful because it gives the eye a single calm contrast: pale center, dark surround. There is no movement except weather. A drifting cloud may dim everything at once. A breeze may trouble leaves or herbs if any are planted there. Otherwise the court exists as a stable piece of night the monastery has agreed to keep open. Moonlight also encourages imagination without forcing it. One may think of prayer, memory, solitude, or simply air. Medieval people certainly read the night sky differently than most modern urban viewers do, yet even without romanticizing astronomy, we can say that the moon gave shape to hours between candlelight and dawn. It offered the only large-scale illumination not made by human hands. For someone trying to sleep, a moonlit courtyard is almost the perfect inner image. It is contained, cool, low in detail, and emotionally spacious. A monastery at night had many enclosed rooms, but the courtyard ensured that the sky was never entirely absent. A courtyard under moonlight is also a lesson in proportion. The sky is vast, but the walls frame it. The night is open, but the cloister contains it. This balance between immensity and enclosure gives the scene its special calm. One can feel the world beyond the monastery without being overwhelmed by it. The courtyard makes distance gentle. The surfaces in such a place would not shine evenly. Moonlight is selective. It catches the rim of a basin, the edge of a stone, the upper line of a wall, the wetness of grass, or the pale side of a branch. Everything else remains quiet and partial. This partial visibility is more restful than full description. It allows the mind to complete the scene slowly, without urgency. If there were herbs or simple plantings in the garth, the night air might carry their scent faintly, especially after rain or in warmer months. If there were no strong planting, the smell might simply be damp earth, cool stone, and open air. Either way, the courtyard prevents the monastery from becoming only enclosed interior. It reminds the sleeping house that weather and sky still exist. A resident passing near might not stop to admire the scene in the modern romantic sense. Medieval life left less room for casual aesthetic lingering than we often imagine. Yet beauty does not require a person to comment on it. The body receives atmosphere even when the mind is occupied. A pale courtyard crossed many times may enter memory without ever being described. For our quiet walk, the moonlit courtyard can serve as a place to pause. We do not need to do anything there. We can simply let the building surround the open square. The arcades are dark. The center is pale. Above it, the sky continues. The monastery sleeps around a piece of night it has chosen not to cover. Wind around the tower and narrow windows. Not all monastic night was warm or still. Wind had its own authority, especially where towers, high roofs, and narrow window openings created pockets of sound. Even in otherwise calm weather, a building can gather and redirect moving air in ways that become most noticeable after dark. In a monastery, this might be heard as a low passage through a stair slit, a hush along the outer wall, a faint tremor at a shutter, or the tiny movement of flame in a corridor. None of these are dramatic, yet they keep the building from feeling sealed off from the world. The monastery is protected, but not detached from weather. It always remains in conversation with the elements. Wind is interesting in sleep history because it can either disturb or reassure. A loose fitting or a badly hung door might make it frustrating. A sound stone house, by contrast, turns wind into a kind of outer music. One hears the world moving while remaining under cover. That contrast can be profoundly comforting. It tells the body that the shelter is doing its work. Towers intensify this sensation because they place part of the building in a more exposed relationship to height. A bell tower or stair to an upper level would have felt different at night from rooms lower down. The air was thinner, the sound wider, the darkness more open. Yet even there, stone steps and walls preserved continuity. One climbed through exposure while still enclosed. A narrow window at night also deserves a moment of attention. By day it frames the landscape. After dark it frames almost nothing, only a little air, perhaps a star, perhaps rain, perhaps moonlight on distance. The room then stops thinking of the outside as scenery and begins thinking of it as weather. That shift reduces distraction. The monastery turns inward again. Wind gives old buildings a sense of edge. It tells the occupants where the outside is pressing. A thick wall may seem immovable by day, but at night the sound of air around it reveals its exposure. The monastery is shelter, yes, but shelter is meaningful only because something moves against it. Wind makes protection audible. Narrow windows were part of that experience. They admitted limited light, limited air, and limited view. In a sleeping room, a small opening could make the outside world feel far away and very near at the same time. A draught might touch the face. A faint whistle might form where stone, wood, or shutter did not meet perfectly. A star might appear as a small cold point rather than a broad sky. The world entered by hints. Towers altered wind because height changes everything. A bell tower, stair tower, or high roofline receives weather before lower rooms do. Air moves differently around corners and openings. It gathers, thins, presses, and releases. The person assigned to move through an upper passage at night would experience the monastery not as a low enclosed house, but as a structure rising into weather. That vertical dimension gives the night depth. Yet the same wind that might sound lonely in a ruin sounds different in a living monastery. A lived building has answering signs of care, shutters fastened, doors latched, lamps guarded, roofs maintained, people sleeping below. The sound of wind is therefore not abandonment. It is the outside touching the boundary of an ordered world. For sleep, this contrast is useful. The mind hears movement but imagines safety. The wind goes around the tower, not through the blanket. It passes the narrow window, not the center of the room. It reminds the listener that weather may continue, but rest can continue too. Midnight waking in a communal house. No matter how disciplined the routine, not everyone slept straight through the night. Someone always woke. A blanket shifted. A dream ended. A bell was anticipated before it came. A draught reached the face. The body asked for a different position. Midnight waking in a communal house is one of the most human parts of the monastic experience because it breaks the idea of perfect order without destroying it. A person waking briefly in a dormitory does not first perceive theology or architecture. He perceives darkness, nearby breathing, the weight of his blanket, and perhaps the dim outline of roof timbers or a distant line of light beneath a door. After a moment, the monastery reassembles around him. He remembers where he is. He remembers the next hour belongs not to private choice but to shared time. That recognition may or may not feel comforting in the instant, but over years it likely becomes one of the defining textures of monastic rest. Sleep is not merely personal recovery. It is a pause nested within a larger schedule. Even waking alone for a minute, one remains inside the community's rhythm. Night waking also produces heightened hearing. A building that seemed fully asleep reveals tiny signs of life: a drip, a settling board, wind in the outer passage, perhaps the very soft step of someone already moving for a duty. Such sounds can make insomnia worse in anxious settings, yet in orderly settings they often do the opposite. They reassure the mind that the world continues coherently even while one lies still. And then, very often, sleep returns not because anything has been solved, but because nothing new is demanded. The room remains the same. The blanket remains the same. The darkness remains familiar. A monastery is good at teaching that sameness can be merciful. A brief waking in the middle of the night often has a suspended quality. For a few seconds, a person belongs to neither yesterday nor morning. In a monastery, that suspension would be held inside a very definite setting. The sleeper might not immediately remember the hour, but he would know the shape of the room. He would know the community around him. He would know, after a breath or two, that nothing unusual had happened. That recognition is calming. Much of nighttime anxiety comes from not being able to place oneself quickly. The monastic dormitory, for all its discomforts, offered repeated orientation. The same roof. The same nearby bodies. The same expected bell. The same path to the chapel. The mind could reassemble the world from a few familiar cues. The sounds of other sleepers might be irritating at times, but they could also reassure. Breathing, shifting, a muffled cough, a blanket drawn closer, these are signs of ordinary life continuing. In deep darkness, ordinary life can be a great comfort. It tells the woken person that he is not singled out by the night. Others share the cold and the hour, even if they are not awake to say so. A monk who woke before the bell might lie still and listen. Perhaps he would pray quietly. Perhaps he would simply wait for sleep to return. Perhaps he would feel the discipline of not disturbing others. Even wakefulness had a social form. One could be alone in consciousness and still responsible to the room. Eventually the body might release its alertness. The darkness would stop feeling like an event and become background again. The blanket would regain its weight. The small sounds would blur. The mind, having checked the world and found it unchanged, would loosen. In that way, even broken sleep could return to the monastery's larger rhythm. Before dawn in the monastic house. The final stretch before dawn has a special atmosphere in any old building. Night is still present, yet something in the air suggests change before light can be clearly seen. In a monastery this hour would have felt especially charged because the next turn of the schedule was near. The house was not waking fully, but it was no longer entirely surrendered to sleep. Air often grows colder before dawn. Candle stubs look smaller. Embers finally seem weak rather than comforting. The silence deepens in one sense and becomes more fragile in another. It is easier now to imagine the bell. Easier to imagine sandals finding the floor. Easier to imagine the first door opening and a line of habitual movement beginning again. This is one of the calmest hours to picture because the world is simplest then. Yesterday has been put away. Today's responsibilities have not yet spread out into variety. There is only the approach of one first action. In monasteries, that first action mattered greatly because it was communal and repeated. The house would soon gather itself not for business but for devotion. Before dawn also reveals how much a building has been holding through the night. Water still waits in the pail. Books remain where they were left. The cloister is unchanged except for cooler air. The guest still sleeps or stirs. The infirmary lamp may still burn. The bell rope still hangs ready. Nothing has vanished. The monastery has simply preserved its order through darkness. That preservation is what makes the setting so restful even to modern listeners. We are imagining a world where not everything must be reinvented each morning. Much is already in place. The day begins from continuity rather than improvisation. A house able to keep itself coherent through the whole night feels almost like a promise. Before dawn, the monastery would contain many kinds of readiness. Some readiness was practical: sandals near beds, lamps prepared, doors known by touch, water waiting, books closed but accessible. Some readiness was bodily: men trained by repetition to wake and move despite cold or weariness. Some readiness was spiritual: the expectation that the first words of the day would not be casual words, but words shaped by prayer. This hour is often colder because the stored warmth of the previous day has faded and the sun has not yet returned. The cold gives the approaching morning a physical edge. It makes blankets harder to leave and corridors sharper to enter. Yet cold also clarifies the senses. The first touch of the floor, the first breath in a passage, the first contact with a cloak, all become memorable. The day begins not with abundance, but with exactness. The building itself seems to wait differently before dawn than at midnight. Midnight feels deep and enclosed. Before dawn feels thin, as though the darkness has been stretched. The same candle that seemed sufficient earlier may now look tired. The same courtyard that was black may begin to hold a grayness not yet visible as light. The world is not awake, but it is no longer fully hidden. For the community, this hour also proves the success of the night's order. If the house can move from sleep to prayer without confusion, then the night has done its work. Objects remained where they were placed. Duties remained remembered. The bell can call, and people can answer. That answer begins long before the first voice is heard. In a sleepy historical imagination, before dawn is a threshold even gentler than dusk. Dusk closes the world. Pre-dawn prepares to open it, but slowly, almost reluctantly. Nothing rushes. The monastery gathers breath before it speaks. Matins and the first grey light. At last the bell sounds, and the monastery moves. What had been held in readiness becomes action. Blankets are left. Cloaks are drawn on. Feet find sandals. Doors open carefully. Small lights shift through corridors. And somewhere beyond the walls, though not yet brightly enough to matter, the first grey light begins to separate roofs from sky. Matins or the appropriate night office returned the community to voice. After hours shaped by silence, measured sound entered again: the bell, the stir of movement, chant, the repeated forms of prayer. This transition was not abrupt in spirit even if it interrupted sleep. The night had been preparing for it all along. The bell rope, the sleeping order, the architecture of chapel and corridor, everything pointed toward this moment. The first grey light is especially beautiful in medieval settings because it does not flood the world at once. It arrives with reluctance. A slit window pales. The cloister court becomes legible in outline. The upper stone of a wall appears before the lower. Candles, still useful, suddenly look different. Their glow no longer owns the room, it shares it. That surrender of night to morning is one of the gentlest changes in human experience. For the monks, dawn did not mean personal freedom. It meant the resumption of a disciplined life. Yet discipline at this hour could feel merciful too, because it prevented aimlessness. No one needed to decide what mornings should be. Morning had already been named, timed, and filled with known acts. In a world of uncertainty, that was no small gift. So the monastery at the edge of dawn feels neither asleep nor fully awake. It feels gathered. The whole night has been a kind of inhalation, and matins is the first outward breath. The movement toward matins would not have been elegant in every individual detail. People waking from sleep are still people. A cloak may be difficult to find in the dark. A sandal strap may resist the fingers. Someone may feel the cold more sharply than another. Someone may rise stiffly. Yet the beauty of the scene lies in the way ordinary bodily reluctance is drawn into a shared action. The community does not become less human by following the bell. It becomes human together. The corridors that were nearly empty earlier now receive a slow stream of movement. Lights appear not as decoration, but as necessities carried by hands. A door opens, then another. The building's plan comes alive. Dormitory, stair, cloister, chapel, spaces that were resting separately begin to connect again. Architecture becomes choreography, and the steps have been learned over years. The first grey light changes the emotional meaning of candles. During deep night, a candle is a small defense against darkness. Near dawn, it becomes a companion to light that is arriving from elsewhere. Its authority softens. The flame still matters, but it no longer has to carry the room alone. This transition is wonderfully gentle to imagine, human light yielding gradually to morning. The chant or spoken office, when it begins, gives the monastery back its voice. Silence has not been wasted, it has prepared the ear. After long quiet, measured words can feel almost physical. They rise into stone, return from it, and settle again. The building participates by echo and proportion. Outside, roof separate from sky. The courtyard becomes a place again rather than a dark opening. The walls show their surfaces. The night's mystery does not vanish dramatically, it thins. Matins belongs to that thinning. It is the sound of a house accepting that another day has arrived, not with excitement, but with fidelity. And so we can leave the monastery as the first grey of morning settles over its roofs and the day begins again in measured steps. Behind us remain the outer gate, the warmed stone cooling into dark, the cloister after Compline, the careful candles in the corridor, the scriptorium closing over unfinished work, the dormitory full of blankets and breath, the waiting bell rope, the herb-scented infirmary, the embers in the kitchen, the moonlit court, the wind at the narrow window, and the first low stir of bodies waking to prayer. What makes such a place restful to imagine is not that it was easy, or soft, or free from hardship. It was none of those things all the time. It could be cold. It could be demanding. It could be physically uncomfortable. But it was ordered. An order, when it is familiar and inhabited with care, can become one of the deepest forms of comfort. The monastery knew what night was for. It knew how to lower the house into darkness without letting it drift into disorder. It knew how to keep sleep, prayer, labor, illness, weather, hospitality, and silence inside one coherent rhythm. That is perhaps why old religious houses continue to feel powerful in the imagination. They turn hours into rooms, and rooms into habits. They make the abstract visible. Night is not just darkness. It is a corridor, a candle, a blanket, a bell, a breath, a little square of moonlight in a courtyard, and then a pale line of dawn. I hope this walk through monastic night has given your mind somewhere quiet to rest. Thank you for spending this time with Sleepy History Archive. Rest well, and I will see you in the next one. As we step away, it is worth carrying the monastery not as a perfect refuge, but as a pattern. Its comfort comes from rhythm more than softness. It gives each hour a shape. It allows work to end, silence to deepen, care to continue, sleep to arrive, and morning to return without surprise. That kind of rhythm is rare in restless times, which may be why imagining it feels so peaceful. The images we have gathered are simple ones: a gate at dusk, stone cooling, a candle turning a corridor into a small world, parchment resting under a weight, sandals waiting beside a bed, rain finding the gutter, herbs in a quiet room, embers under ash, a guest listening to unfamiliar walls, moonlight held in a courtyard, wind moving around a tower, and grey dawn touching the edge of a window. None of these images needs to become dramatic. Their power is in their patience. Perhaps the deepest lesson of monastic night is that rest is helped by preparation. The house becomes quiet because people have done the small things that allow quiet to happen. Doors are closed. Tools are put away. Lamps are tended. Beds are reached. The sick are watched. The bell is ready. Morning is already waiting, but it does not demand attention before its hour. So let the monastery remain behind you now, not as a place you must analyze, but as a slow arrangement of rooms in the dark. Let the cloister empty again. Let the scriptorium cool. Let the dormitory breathe. Let the bell rope hang still until it is needed. Let the courtyard keep its square of sky. And wherever you are listening from, allow that same sense of order to become smaller and personal. One breath, then another. One thought placed down. One sound fading. One night continuing gently around you.